Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Yes, we're going to be having this conversation yet again. It seems like it always comes around maybe once a year or so. I believe we've actually had this twice now in this year, but either way, we are going to be talking once more about marksman itemization and where they are at following the preseason. Now, obviously, preseason is why this conversation is coming back up, as the item system has undergone a radical change, and as it turns out, when your class is mostly based around their itemization and what they're able to build, that naturally you're going to have sort of an outsized impact on your ability to play the game. So tanks, for example, don't really care because, yeah, they're going to build items, but mostly they're concerned about how they actually get impact with their kit itself, whereas a lot of marksmen, specifically crit-based marksmen as well, they really do need their items in order to function, in order to really do what it is they want to be able to, like, max out on in-game. So, naturally, because of where we're at with this preseason, there have been a lot of players who have been complaining about essentially the crit itemization that currently exists for these carries and exactly where they are currently at, and essentially saying that, yeah, their damage is super low and they're not able to do anything. It feels like there's no reason to have these champions. So, just for the record, let's just run through this real quick, because while I do think that there are potentially some certain feels bad moments in this the new item system for crit-based marksmen, I think that at the end of the day, though, the new item system has actually done a good job of addressing that problem in a few different ways. So first and foremost, let's be clear. The crit-based marksman build is specifically designed for marksmen who want to go late game and who want the highest DPS of any class in the game, period. That is essentially what it's designed for. If you're building critical strike on any champion, actually, you will have the highest DPS of any class or any champion in the game. That's just how the item system kind of works. I've even done silly things like in One For All building AD carry Yumi, and yeah, you do good damage with your auto attacks. You're able to actually put out a surprising amount of DPS, which a lot of people don't expect. However, the disadvantage of this build is that it is a late game build, because you need multiple items in order to make it work. It scales significantly better as you sort of move up. Like, there are a lot of things that make this build in particular very weighted towards the later stages of the game. That's just kind of how it's always been, and I think that that's exactly where it needs to be honest. I don't feel like there's any reason to have this build spike earlier, that it should spike early, because again, this build specifically is designed to say, by the time 40 minutes rolls around at a 6-item build, this is going to be absolute maximum DPS. In that regard, it doesn't make any sense for this build to spike early or for this build to be relevant in the early stages of the game. If you're opting into a crit build, you essentially should be saying, I'm forfeiting the early stages of the game. I am looking to try and scale to 35 minutes. So, and this does make sense, I think, for a lot of the characters that do tend to build straight crit. If you're thinking about characters like Tristana, for example, where that's essentially all she builds is straight critical strike. Yeah, Tristana is really saying, I'm trying to go all the way late game. I'm trying to make sure I can get all the way to the point where I just one-shot people, but I have to get there. I have to be able to actually reach the later stages of the game where I can have really high damage per second, where I can have really high impact on the game. So, in that regard, if you are opting into the critical strike build, you should be telling yourself, I'm going for the later stages of the game, which means that you will not have an impact in the early stages. If you are opting into crit, there's going to be a long period of the game where all you're going to be doing is last hitting, getting minions, trying to get gold, and essentially providing DPS where you can. It's not like these characters do no damage at all, but yes, your impact on the game will be significantly smaller than, let's say, your mid lane mage or assassin or your tanks, because they're providing value to the team that's either spiking earlier than yours, or they have utility that makes them just generically good because they're not only providing damage. And essentially, that's one of the things where I'm kind of getting at with, I don't understand the complaints about the marksman item system, because yeah, if you're building crit, you shouldn't be good early. Like, that's kind of sort of by design here. It should be the kind of system where if you are going to go for this maximum DPS late game build, that you're not going to have the impact early, but that there are options to let you have that impact earlier on. I do feel like you can always play utility carries like Ashe or Varus if you really are looking for at least some degree of influence on the game in the early stages. Ashe is going to have the ability to just kind of use her utility, use her slows, use her initiation, use her scouting, and always have an impact on the game regardless of what she's building. Even if she's building crit, Ashe will have an impact on the game. So to a certain extent, there is that factor of it depends on who you're playing. If you're playing a character whose only role is damage, that's the only reason they exist, then you are not going to have as good of a time because you're not going to be able to have that sort of impact. So I do empathize with that particular thing a little bit, but there are always options. There are always the ability to pick different champions, and that essentially I think is the problem I have with the assumption that AD carries are just bad, is that there is always the ability to flex up your picks. I feel like a lot of League of Legends is not necessarily about playing one champion alone, which I know sounds like heresy. Like, why? What do you mean I can't play just the same champion in every game? But if you do want to have an impact, if you want to have other tools that maybe your preferred champion doesn't bring, you will have to learn to play more champions. And as I was kind of saying before, the new item system I think gives more viable options for builds with less total DPS, but that spike earlier. I do think that there are a lot more options that kind of allow you to sort of play in the style you want that doesn't involve having to go for the sort of the sort of Infinity Edge build that gives you the maximum total DPS but requires you to have a very heavy investment in critical strike. There's lethality in crit builds with things like the Collector that kind of allow you to do some good damage in the early stages of the game. You're going to spike pretty hard early. You're not going to do as great late, but at least you will have an earlier damage spike in the game without requiring you to go all the way to 30 minutes. Divine Sunder, I think, is a really interesting option for poke builds due to the Sheen proc, and essentially always being able to do good damage with it as well because of that percent health damage. If you have a champion that can kind of fire an ability and then get off an auto attack, you have options to kind of do some good work there. There's also the ability to go for a slightly more utility-focused build with Storm Razor Fire Cannon, being able to provide that guaranteed slowing auto attack from quite a distant range if you're looking to set up your team for picks. And obviously there are these Spellslinger-esque builds with Navori Quick Blades and Essence Reaver that do allow certain champions, I'm not going to say every champion can build that feels a little cheesy, but there are certain champions that can opt into that build as opposed to Critical Strike, which again, they won't have maybe quite as high just raw auto attack DPS, but they will have the ability to use their spells more often and sort of get in either Sheen procs or otherwise get in for decent amounts of damage by weaving auto attacks in with their abilities. So you do have some degree of options for different ways you can be building your champions as opposed to just always opting in for the critical strike. I know a lot of people are saying as well the new item system is not quite as good first buys for AD carries, which I don't know that I necessarily agree. I will say that the new item system does mean that marksmen feel like they don't have quite as much early AD, which does feel a little bad, but I really like the fact that these new starting items do provide both attack speed and attack damage to a certain extent. You're able to kind of sort of get a little bit of damage through. It kind of sort of gives you a little bit of everything that a marksman wants in one package. So as opposed to having to get the Infinity Edge and then Zeal before you really feel like you're able to get online, you sort of finish your first item and kind of have a little bit of everything you want, which I do think is nice. And then it allows you to flex your build around into other stats that you may decide that you want to go for instead. So being able to say, hey, yeah, I did decide to get this item early on, and I'm going to instead opt into more attack damage because I feel like I want to hit slightly harder, or I want to opt into more attack speed because I do have maybe on hit effects that I can abuse, or I have utility that I can benefit from. Things like Ashe slowing auto attacks, for example, being able to constantly reapply that slow could be a reason to go for the attack speed focus build more than the attack damage focus build. Obviously, you're probably going to build both either way, but it does give you the ability to flex around. And really, the survival tools I think that AD carries have been given in the new item system are absolutely massive. Obviously, there are a lot of people who are just defaulting to Kraken Slayer because they're like maximum DPS, but Gale Force and Shield Bow are actually amazing. I feel like there are a lot of games where just having Shield Bow first allows me to survive in significantly more situations than I would have thought possible and sort of get through an Assassin's Burst or a Mage's Combo or just survive a gank situation that I might not have otherwise. And as long as you're surviving as a marksman, you're still getting CS, you're still able to kind of scale to late game. And in a similar fashion as well, Gale Force provides you with that one-time dash, which it has the damage component if you want to be a little bit more aggressive with it, but also just the ability to either dash yourself to safety or to dash yourself out of range of a skill shot that might be coming in. It's just a huge, huge advantage. that I think is getting overlooked a little bit in the new item system because of the sort of lure of Kraken Slayer and how much DPS it can put out. But either way, that's just kind of my musings on this whole topic, guys. I know I've talked about this before, but I do want you guys to let me know down in the comments if you feel like marksmen in particular are in a bad spot, if you think that they're doing fine. If you've played a lot of them, let me know your grievances with the item system in general. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this whole subject, especially if you have watched through this haul and kind of see where I'm coming from in regards to the new item system. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.